Let me get this fixed. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malik Young Park dotting inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Yes, I was working on trying to follow this tournament. I had posted the first game like literally once it was done. And I was working on the second video, but I had to take care of something pretty important. So it took me a couple hours, unfortunately. So I do have the round 2 game that I was working on between Jeffery Xiong and Wesley. So straight up American match. You know, with a little bit of Philippines. Got the little flag down there for you guys. Like I said, this one is taken from round 2. You know, some heavy hitters. Yes, for all my people in the Philippines, I would say mabuhay to you guys. Kamusta na? Let me see. Ingat lagi. Mabuting pagbati. Masaya Komukita King Moody. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff as always. I got much love and appreciation for you guys. Okay, so there isn't any other ones. That is it. So yes, if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we got E4. Make sure my volume is up. It's a little bit too high. We got E5. Knight comes to F3. We see knight to C6. Bishop to B5. A6. So you guys have seen this many times before. This is the Ruy Lopez, and it is the Morphy variation, Morphy defense rather. It's also known as the Spanish game. I like Ruy Lopez. I'm just kind of stuck on certain names when I get on them, but you know, you have a couple different options in this position. You know, you can back up the bishop here. A much rarer, you can back up the bishop to C4 or even the E2. And just, you know, castle next move. You also have the ability to take. I mean, there are the two main options are going to be bishop to A4 or takes on bishop takes C6. There are a lot of games in the database between those two. But the most common way is bishop back to A4. So we have knight to F6. We see castles by white. And as you guys know, you are not winning a pawn here because you have takes, rook coming to E1. You have D4 situations coming up and you are getting pinned along this file. So everything is safe for now. So we do see bishop to E7. And now you have to make a decision of how you want to cover the E4 pawn. Because since the bishop has covered checks, there aren't any pins along that file. Rook comes to E1. We see B5. Bishop back to B3. We have castles by black. We got C3. You know, we're trying to create a little bit of space for this bishop to back up. Also, this is a very nice diagonal for it to be on, attacking H7. We got D5. Pawn takes D5. Knight takes D5. Knight takes E5. And, you know, white has pretty much just won a pawn. Now, this is like very much theory, but, you know, psychologically, you do have a pawn as white. Knight takes E5, rook takes E5. You do have C6 because you were double attacking this knight. And we actually have D3. Now, this is all very standard theory. Like, these positions have been seen very many times. I'm going to be honest with you. Personally, I don't like D3. It is definitely one of the top 2 moves, but I'm more of a D4. I kind of feel like, you know, if you can get D4 in and it's pretty much the same as D4 or it's the same as D3, why not just go ahead and push it to the 2 moves immediately? I kind of just feel like it opens up the game a little bit more going towards the king side. You know, you're tucking the bishop back here, but, you know, that's me and I'm not these guys, obviously. I almost had a few times that I could have played Jeffery Xiong. You know, because we did frequent the same chess academy in North Texas, but I never seemed to be there at the same time as him, so I missed that chance. He plays more Blitz tournaments anyways as well. So anyway, I like to think I could do okay, you know, at least not get demolished. But like I said, we do have D3. All very standard theory stuff. Bishop comes to D6. Rook comes down to E1. We see bishop to F5. And bishop to F5 is just like immediately attacking this this pawn. And making it kind of a little bit hard because you do kind of want to develop the knight like this. So you can get to F3, the most natural square for the knight. And bishop to F5 is making that a little bit impossible because you're going to be dropping the pawn immediately. So queen comes to F3, trying to address that problem. And then we see queen coming to H4. And yes, you are up a pawn as white, but you are kind of down just a little bit because you do not have all of your pieces developed. And, you know, black is, you know, doing a pretty good job attacking you. So, you know, you definitely have to tread lightly. So we have G3, of course, you know, we were getting threatened by, you know, some nasty checks on H3. So queen comes to H3. We see bishop to H3. And this is finally allowing black to get their pawn back. So like I said, I mean, you know, this is all theory. But, you know, like I said, I just prefer d4 over d3. It just kind of seemed like a more natural move to make. But we do see bishop takes d3, knight to d2. Bishop comes back to f5, and then we do see the novelty of the game, which is knight to e4. And for some of you guys that are sitting at this position and looking, it is actually very legitimate to take bishop takes d5. There aren't any repercussions, and you basically just get another pawn again. So after bishop takes d5, bam. After bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5, queen takes d5, you are attacking that bishop on d6. After the bishop backs up to e7, queen come into b7, and like I said, it's just a pawn. You have gotten the pawn. I don't know how valuable the pawn would be, but you know, a lot of chess is a psychological thing, because you've had people that are just so far ahead as far as the computer's concerned, but you know, can't always win it as humans. So I mean, I'm a material guy, so I mean, I feel like getting an extra pawn is worth a little something psychologically. But like I said, we do have the novelty of the game, which is knight to e4. Bishop takes e4, queen takes e4. We got rook a to e8, getting a nice tempo on that queen. The queen comes back to f3. We see knight takes e3, rook takes e3, rook takes e3, queen takes e3, queen goes to f5. We see rook over to d1. And now, you know, we're just trying to take over this this open file. Kind of the same with the queen, but, you know, a little different. Bishop comes to c5. So we're getting a nice tempo on the queen. We're also kind of, you know, x-raying through to this f2 pawn, which, as I always tell you guys, is fairly weak. And you definitely have the ability to go queen to e2 here. But Xiong just decides, hey, man, let's just trade the queens off. So queen goes to f4. We see queen takes f4, pawn takes f4. And it does look a little bit ugly, you know, the fact that you have, you know, kind of compromised your king's position a little bit. But the pieces are very much reduced, and now you're into an endgame, so it's a little bit different. And so we have a5, a3. You know, we're trying as white to put our pawns on opposite color squares than our bishop, so that we can have, like, you know, just complete movability. We see a4, bishop comes back to a2. We see rook to e8. We see rook to d7. And, you know, this is hitting that really tender square on f7. So black literally just does the same thing. They say, hey, man, you're trying to hit f7. I'm trying to hit f2. So as you can see, no matter what phase of the game you're in, this is always a live type of a situation. So always remember f2, f7. So we see rook back to d8 with check. And, of course, we have bishop to f8. And that's the only move because, you know, of course, we're going to be looking at back rank issues. If the rook covered and this was going to be pretty nasty, you're going to be doing this, you know, winning that pawn right there, possibly. So we see backing here, bishop back to f8. We see rook down to d7. And this is putting an immense amount of pressure on this pawn. We see g6, bishop takes f7 with check. So white has managed to grab another pawn. We see king to h8. We see b4. And b4 is actually a little bit weird. It's definitely the best move in the position. One of the best moves in the position. But it just seems like it gives black a little bit. But you are able to, after en passant, take back with the bishop on b3. So you're still doing all right. So bishop takes on a3. Everything is all even. You know, white does have just a slight issue with their pawn structure over here, though. We do see rook to d8 with check. King comes down to g7. We see rook to d7 with check. Rook comes up to e7 to cover, so we trade off rooks. Rook takes e7, bishop takes e7. We see king to g2, king comes to f6, king comes to f3, bishop to d6, king comes to e4. So, you know, both sides just trying to maximize their king's position going on. You know, this king needs to stay held to this pawn. And right now, you know, white is going to start to try to put their pawns on light squares so they can't be attacked. When you have rooks on the board, it's a little bit different because, you know, you have the ability to protect with rooks. And so we see f3, bishop comes down to f2. We see bishop to c2, c5, king comes to d5, bishop to e3. And something's kind of has to give now. h3, we see b4, pawn takes b4, pawn takes b4. We see king down to c4. Bishop comes down to d2. And so, you know, black is pretty much deciding, you know, between protecting their pawn and trying to capture this pawn over here because the king is restricted at the moment. We do have pawns covering these squares, and then this bishop is covering this square, so we don't really have the ability to approach the pawn with our king. And, you know, if we did want to try to do something, you'd be pushing the pawn here, but you'd actually be helping out, you know, white with that. So bishop comes to e4. We see king to e6. King comes to b3. King to d6, king comes to c4. We see bishop to c3, bishop to c2. We see king over to e6, Bishop comes to E4, king comes to F6, king goes to B3, king comes to G7, king comes to C4, king comes to F7, king comes to B3, king comes to F6, king comes to C4, bishop comes to D2, king comes to B3, and then now we have something that gives. Bishop takes on F4, king takes on B4, we see king to G5, we see bishop to D5, king comes to H4, bishop comes to E6, we see king to G3, king comes to C4, king takes on F3, we see king down to D3, we have G5, bishop goes back to C8. We're trying to maintain you know, the holding of this pawn, and also trying to see if we can reduce the movement of these pawns. We see H5, bishop comes to G7, and then we see G4, and it looks like black is breaking through this position. You know, you might have trades and stuff going on, and then you look like you're going to be able to kind of get this pawn down. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what Jeffery Xiong plays in this position to try to defend and make sure black can't get their pawn queened, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So something I mentioned to you guys, I'm not sure how many videos ago I mentioned it, but you guys notice in the position that we do have opposite colored bishops. And you guys are probably also familiar with the fact that if you leave your opponent with only a bishop and a king, they do not have sufficient material to force checkmate on you. So basically you have two different ways that you can address this situation that you have here. You can either take with the pawn or you can take with the bishop. They're both equally fine. So if you decided to go out with a bang like Jeffery Xiong did and play bishop takes G4, sacrificing the bishop, because like I said, you're going to be leaving your opponent with, you know, non-mating material. Then that was correct. But you know, you can also go pawn takes as well. We'll look at that in a second, but bishop takes G4, pawn takes G4, pawn takes G4. And now you guys you can see that black is left without mating material. We see bishop to D2, just basically making sure that we trade everything off. King takes D2, king takes G4. And as you guys can see, you are just going to do the king dance forever on this one. But if we go back to G4, it was also possible to take pawn takes G4, you know, pawn takes G4, bishop takes G4, and then get into pretty much the same situation where black can just never mate you. You know, if you had a situation where the pawn was trying to push, you know, you can always just do this right here. And you're always going to be able to hold, you know, just give away the pawn. You're always going to be able to hold this square. So either you just literally dance around like this forever, or, you know, black pushes their pawn at some point and you just sacrifice the bishop. It's fine. It all ends up being the exact same thing pretty much at the end of the day. With or without a bishop is the same thing. So that was the game that I was working on a few hours ago, and it had actually like just gotten over with. So I was, like I said, trying to keep up with all of the games, but after, you know, my absence and me coming back, I literally had everything done. The thumbnail, I had the layout and everything done. And I already had the game analyzed. So I was like, man, let me go ahead and throw this in there. Unfortunately, it was a draw, and I don't like showing as many that many draws. And I actually haven't even looked at the other games. I'm not even sure if Wesley won any games. I'm a little bit behind. I'm hoping I maybe can squeeze another video in, but it's going to be kind of tight because I do need to get to sleep. But I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan for stopping by and watching and checking my stuff out. I will say Makito Tayo Mamaya and Pa'alam, and I will see you guys next time.